things I really wanted to fix was the flow of the room. In the old room, you could be looking at a piece from Camp Miles Standish and then turn your head and now you're back in the Revolutionary War. I wanted things to flow a bit more chronologically, to really feel like you're moving through the time periods.
Anyone who's been here for the last decade or so has seen we've made a lot of changes and improved a lot of the experience of visiting. But at the heart of the entire building is still the collection. I have wanted to renovate the military room maybe since one of the first times that I was the director and here, and before that even as the curator.
There's some amazing personal stories that happen in this space, and we want to be able to share that. We have the collection for it, we have the history for it, and it really just tells what a lot of these people went through, I think in a better way now.
We had some older mannequins in here with uniforms, and we really wanted to display the uniforms, I think, more effectively, a little bit more fully. We had a number of swords and guns throughout the room with the smallest little label you can imagine, maybe just like a sentence. And very early on, I think both Bronson and Dr. Hannah, having so much familiarity with the collection, could say, you know, we know who carried this and we know the story of this or where this was. And so we knew everything kind of needed to expand and needed to have more stories associated with the pieces. As you look around, there's a lot of objects in this space, and they all just have really, really fascinating stories. And so we wanted very early on to squeeze in as many stories as we could into the smallest exhibit room in the building, and I think that was pretty successful.
Everyone gets taught what the Declaration of Independence is. Not everyone knows that one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence was living in their hometown at the time.
People from Taunton have participated in every major conflict since before we were even a country. I have been thinking about that and thinking about telling that story in kind of new and interesting ways. I think it's fair to say back to some of the first times I walked through this building.
The planning process, in short, was long. I got the go-ahead to really start moving on this project in summer 2022. From then on, it was, sketches, multiple drafts of sketches, planning out every object that we want to get on display, then having to trim, move, that type of thing. I had weekly planning meetings with Katie McDonald, our executive director, and Dr. Hannah, our board president, just talking about design, talking about layout, talking about what stories we want to cover, talking about the history, the range we want to cover on that.
At one point, we had so much blue tape on these walls because everything gets measured, and so just everything got planned. I think if you look around, I think you can tell how much of the planning went into it, but I think, some of the conversations about which swords do you pick when you have, this isn't even all of our military collection. We have even more things, and you have to make cuts. Make sure you're telling the right stories with the pieces you have, and if you move the currency from the Revolution section, then you've got to add something else over here to talk about inflation in World War II, and all of these things are tied together.
This is a really important area of local history, and we wanted to do it right, do it justice.
I was the person that we'd have a nice plan, and I would kind of throw a wrench sometimes and be like, well, what about this, or what about this, and sort of expanded it out. So the answer to the question, how was the planning process, I would say probably complicated, long, detailed, but I think all those things lead to a really good result.
I couldn't tell you the amount of labor hours that goes into before you even close the room and start working in the space.
The biggest challenges were interesting challenges. First, the military room is the smallest exhibition space in the building, while at the same time the military collection, our collection, is very full and very interesting. So the challenge was first to choose what would be displayed, and second, to find the best way to display it in that room.
I think it is the smallest exhibit room in the building at about 240 square feet, and we somehow managed to fit 240 objects, so roughly an object every square foot in the room. So working with such a small space, wanting to fill it with as many pieces and stories and history as we possibly can, but without having it feel too jam-packed.
It was at one time a challenge of riches with the size of the collection, and a challenge, a very specific challenge of space with the size of that room.
I think the biggest challenge for a nonprofit making any major project is always fundraising, finances, trying to do things to the level that they are worthy of. We are part of an organization that has amazing members, amazing donors, people who really support local history. So we had a fundraising campaign where we asked for people to help support the project. And that definitely has a real world effect of, depending on how much money you can raise, it's how many sheets of plexi, digital screens, textiles can be conserved. Like, it has an impact, and we're just really fortunate that there was nothing that we cut out for financial reasons.
My interests run in military history with the Civil War and World War II. We have strong collections in both of those areas. We also have material in both of those areas which has never been shown before, and I wanted a good representation of new objects to be able to be seen by the public.
We have these awesome posters. My favorite is a Civil War bounty poster. I believe it's from 1863. I saw that for the first time about a decade ago, and immediately I'm like, that would look amazing on display. Didn't have the means to do it safely back then. Now we can. With the changes to the lighting in the room, the slabs that we use to mount all these pieces to the wall to keep them nice, flat and firm and stable. Now we get to, hang all these pieces and show them to everybody. That's been pretty exciting. I'm also a big fan of the swords and guns, so that was I wanted just a little bit more of those in the military room.
I've always loved our hat collection. We have a great collection from colonial rounds, doughboy helmets. We have some from Vietnam. We have an amazing collection. We use the hats through sort of just like the serendipity of the math working out, as strange as that is to say, to do a timeline around the perimeter of the room. And the serendipity is that they sort of fell right into their era without having to move them. Like, we lined them around the perimeter of the room, and they're in the right section to where they belong. So they're in the room, and they're in their time period, and they're connecting to the stories they're telling. But then you can go to the catalog. That's the name we gave it, a catalog of hats. So it's the catalog, and you can scroll through, and you can see them on little pictures, and then you hit one and you can really see it, and you can appreciate it, I think, from an aesthetic point of view, from a detail point of view.
We have Richard DeWert's Medal of Honor, which we are so proud for that to be a part of our collection. Not only is that a highlight, I mean, that's an absolute gem of a piece that we get to have, and I think a great piece to use to tell his story. General Pierce's coat with his arm blown off. I love that piece. We haven't been able to display it in a while, so I really wanted that to be in here. The interviews in particular, the audio stations. Love that change in this room. I love being able to share those clips. We recently got a uniform donated. It's a Desert Combat uniform from 2006 from Iraq, and that expands the total range of coverage in the room. Trial and error was how we came to the final designs.
Through the balance of the number of objects we had, the space, the stories, mixed media between archival pieces, three-dimensional objects, audio, labels. You always have to fit in labels, but you don't know until the public sees it, and you don't know until you open it. So far, it's been great. We've been doing some guided tours. We've had some school vacation visitors. We had an exhibit opening with our members. So, this is the final design, but you never know. Like, the next object could come in, or more research is discovered. I think the real credit goes to Bronson, because this is what was drawn. Like, this is what was designed. This is what those drawings look like. And there are certain instances where it's like you can see the paper, and then you see the wall, and that's what it is. And I think that's a real testament to the quality of work, the planning, the foresight.
The swords and gun section we got to pretty quick. That one, I was pretty excited about, and we were able to get to a good design concept on the second or third draft. The longest one would have been Taunton in the Revolutionary era. That, I think I did 11 different sketches to get to where we are now. You just had to get to a point where the space worked, where you covered everything you wanted to cover, where every object is going to be displayed not only well but safely. Once you checked all those boxes in a section, okay. Day one was an interesting day. So we got to the point with the builders that they're building everything. Part of this element was the installation of a new wall in the center. Once that got booked, we had our first real deadline. The new wall is going to be plaster. There's going to be dust flying everywhere. So we had to shut the room down. That would have been like late July, early August 2023. We shut the room down, and we have to now get every object out of here. Nothing can stay. That plaster dust gets in everywhere, and it can be harmful to the pieces. Day one was just sort of boxing, cataloging, photographing all the objects that were already in here, cleaning every object, both the ones that are going to be coming back to the room and the ones that are going to go back into storage. We had to take all the cases off the wall, which again, we're talking more dust flying, more plastering, sanding, painting. So yeah, a lot had to happen really in those first 2 weeks. Kind of impromptu, did our first YouTube video on day one. I think we were cleaning, photographing, and emptying out the former headwear case, the military headwear case. And I happened to be holding Dry's couches at my hand. I'm like, oh, let's do this one. That was our first short. The biggest physical challenges, once I was in here, once I was working with the volunteers and getting everything ready, I mean, it would have to be when the wall's installed. I mean, at that point, your space got pretty limited. So I had room for maybe 1 or 2 tables at a time to work on objects. But other than that, just kind of walking around that wall in the center of the room a million times, having to go from one end to the other depending on the space limitations. Don't let anyone tell you that working in a museum is not physical work. The amount of times we took the old cases up and down the stairs, hauling those out, those are pretty heavy. The most physically taxing part was moving that cannon. It took me and our caretaker Mike, bless him, it took us hours to move it from one corner of the room to about 10 feet or so outside the room before we had the floors redone. That thing weighs an absolute ton. I would not do that again. The biggest physical change that I was looking forward to the most was hands down the new wall. In the first room, we had these 2 smaller cases in the center, and it took up more physical floor space than the current wall does.
It probably didn't double the size of display space, but it almost did. And I thought that was the most interesting and the most successful piece of that renovation. That was a great idea.
I think it actually improves the flow of the room. Despite building a wall right down the center, it gives direction, it gives exhibit space.
The wall changes the game big time. Not only can we get a lot more objects on display, we're able to get it wired up, so we have 2 additional touchscreen interactives in the room. What it's done for not only the Camp Miles Standish section, which I love, having that big blown up graphic on that side.
The graphic of Camp Miles Standish is just so impactful and it grabs you and you're like, I want to see more, and luckily there's a screen right there so you can see more, and I just think that's really clever and interesting and fun to look at.
In the initial room, swords and guns were sort of just perimetered around the room, how everything else is now. This keeps them all together. It's a lot more cohesive.
One thing that the wall is really successful at is helping to create kind of quiet moments. You can't see the other side, so you're in the subset of the exhibit that you're in while you're in it, and you can kind of focus. In a military exhibit, you should really read what we're talking about people's lives, we're talking about really important events, we're talking about people who were killed, people who were wounded. Many survived and came back and donated their pieces, but I just think it gives you kind of a pause. Someone could be on the other side and looking at something, having their own moment of reflection that's not impacting the one that I'm having here, and I think that's a really sort of, again, interesting way to create some connection to the stories that we're telling.
In terms of last-minute adjustments when we were implementing everything in the physical space, what we had to do for Ebenezer Pierce's coat in the Civil War section. In the final sketch that went to the fabricators, Pierce's coat was displayed like all the other textiles in this room, up high up on a wall case. During the conservation process and the stabilization process with that piece, you know, it became very evident that the best way to display this piece would actually be lying down flat. So that's a different case altogether. Takes up more width on that wall in the Civil War section. So I had to basically plug and move everything in that section. And this was after we'd already gone to fabricators, like the final designs have been done. Because that's the coat being at its most stable. With the lighting inside the case, the safe lighting in the case, it can stay out now permanently. That is its permanent home to be on display. So I'm going to go with what my favorite story is. And that is the revolutionary story of General David Cobb. This is a heck of a tale. So he came to Taunton as a kid, lived here his whole life, up until the Revolutionary War. He was a surgeon in Taunton after he graduated from Harvard College. He starts the first smallpox hospital in the town. Then, you know, things start building up during the Revolutionary War, and they pass the Intolerable Acts. He's an ardent patriot by that point. He says in 1774 at a convention that the people's liberty is under threat by the pretended authority of the English crown. That is a hangable offense in 1774. He enlists in the Continental Army immediately after the events at Lexington and Concord, rises through the ranks, serves throughout the whole war. By 1781, he's in the staff of General George Washington. He's one of his aides de camp. Bears witness to the entire siege of Yorktown. Dines with Washington and Cornwallis following the surrender. So he's this Taunton guy who's seeing all these huge things firsthand and is directly involved. Comes home from the war, named general in the local militia, named a judge in the local court, so he's an incredibly powerful individual in the county. In 1786, protesters come to town, organized by Daniel Shays, and they want to disrupt the courts. So October that year, they gather outside of right on Taunton Green, present-day Taunton Green, outside the courthouse, demand to be heard. 300 armed protesters. David Cobb knew they were coming. He organized the militia, so those protesters were met with 500 armed, trained militiamen. David Cobb marches out in his full general's regalia and starts the armed negotiation. Tells them, okay, yeah, we'll hear your case, but later. Protesters didn't like that. So David Cobb gets fed up. He was a bit of a character, and he reportedly says, "Away with your whining. I'll hold this court in blood if I have to. I either die today, General, or I sit as a judge." And shortly after, the protesters disperse. They get marched out of town. And without bloodshed, he stopped that rebellion here in Taunton. All that said, he had about another 40 plus years of public service after that. It's an incredible life story. What I love is that we get to show a lot of pieces related to him. So we have his portrait, which was conserved for the project. We have his vest, his cane, his personal walking stick. We have the sword that he had on his person when those protesters came to town. So we get to tell this complete picture of him, which I think is really cool.
One of the best parts of that new room is the fact that it's much more representative of Taunton military history. For example, we were better able to show the history of women in warfare, not only in the military but also on the home front. And we had not been able to do that before. And also we were able to show people of color in a light that they had not been shown before.
My hope is that now that this is the final public space that's been renovated, the Old Colony History Museum now as a whole is a place where the Taunton community and the greater Taunton community and southeastern Mass and anyone who's visiting from anywhere should be able to come and learn about this part of the world and the impact that it has had. And I think in this space there were just amazing stories. It's a space that I hope the public feels welcome in, is accessible for learning and asking questions and maybe exploring their own family history, maybe just getting more interested in history, and I think that's our job. Our job here is to share the stories that connect you and I to history. That's what we do every day, is we want to collect and preserve and share the objects that tell the stories of the people who have come before us, and our job is to do that for all time. Anyone who visits here, we hope that it's just a friendly, welcoming place that also maybe makes you think a little bit and maybe teaches you something you didn't know. And if we can teach you something, and smile while we're doing it, and they say thanks for coming, and encourage you to come back and bring a friend, and therefore we all have a better understanding of our shared history, then we've done our job. Anyone who has worked here or volunteered here since I've been here it should find themselves in this room. I think the volunteer that cataloged bullet molds in the basement in 2017, like, you're here, like, your work made it possible for us to say, oh, we want to put something on display in the armament section, and then in the Civil War bullet section, let's go to that drawer, and they're organizing their catalog. So the work that our team does, and that team is so expansive. Our hope is that we keep building on it, and we keep expanding on the capacity of what we're able to do. And so from the donors in 1850 to the donors in 2024 who made this happen. I mean, everyone on both ends and in between, I think, made this amazing space possible, which is really kind of humbling to think about. That our job is to steward this. It's we don't own it. This is for the public. This is for you to come and enjoy. And so our job is just to take care of it and preserve it and exhibit it so that people enjoy it. And there's been just countless people in that process. I think Bronson Mashad did a great job. I hope he's really excited that it's complete, and I think nothing on military history in Taunton would be complete without Dr. Hannah's input. I think you can see the result of just really talented people working on it, so we want to thank all of them.
I would like to thank Katie McDonald, Bronson Mashad, for the truly outstanding work that they did. That military room will bear their signatures for generations, I think. And they deserve all of that credit. I would also very much like to thank those people who donated. Every museum, large and small, relies on the generosity of people who share the mission and share the vision. We have ours, and we're very, very lucky to have them. That military room, as it looks now, would not have been possible without their generosity.
Nothing gets done on your own, particularly a project of this scale. So a few people I'd love to thank. I mean, certainly Katie, she had my back on this from day one. Dr. Hannah, from his encyclopedia of knowledge, and fact checking, he's been great. I really got to thank our volunteer corps that we have here. Volunteers stepped up, gave me a lot of help with this project. Specifically, I got to mention Christine, Aaron, and Victoria, who came in on this project. They were instrumental in getting it done when we did.